when Jay Mueller started swimming 16 months ago, he came from a running and cycling background, but had no swimming background, so he learnt as an adult. He came to one of our clinics 12 months ago, and prior to that, he was around 215 to 230 per 100. And when he came and saw us, he was just under that 2-minute mark. Now, fast forward to today, Jay's now able to swim consistently in the 120s. His fastest 50 is a sub 30, and his fastest 100 is a 106. We don't often see this kind of improvement this quickly. So I wanted to get Jay on the podcast to talk about how he was able to see such a big improvement in a short space of time. What drills and exercises did he do in the water to develop his stroke? And what sort of strength training has he been doing to avoid shoulder injuries and to develop the strength that's needed to be a good swimmer? So let's get into today's episode with Jay Mueller. When you first started, once you could swim more than 100 meters without stopping, where were you at in terms of your pace, and where are you now for those that are listening?
Yeah. So my pace when I first started, I think once I started swimming continuously, comfortably, was, in like the 230 to 215 range. And that, that was like if I was swimming continuously, I could probably get under 2 minutes if I was going hard. But one of the big things that happened was I was here at work, and I went to do a swim before work, and I did a very easy 500-meter warm up. And that was at like 2 minutes per 100. And I'm like, now I'm going to do a really hard 500. And I did. And I went really hard and was still at 2 minutes per 100. And so that was before I saw you. I actually started to get a little quicker, but I started to have big time shoulder issues too. So I was like, man, I just got to see Brenton in person and he'll help me sort it out. So I got to the end of last year and did Noosa as my first triathlon, and I did a minute 40 per 100 by that point for the 1500 meters. And I actually think my straight line speed's a bit better, but just like you have to make all the mistakes in the pool, I had to make all the mistakes in the open water too, and that was not being good at sighting at all. And swimming way off course. So there was tons of stopping, looking around for 25 seconds, finding the buoys and stuff. So it was a bit of a mess, but still quick enough to make me happy. And I did that same speed at another triathlon. And then things started to click in the pool. And now I think my fastest 100 I did was sort of this, and it's not with a diving start, it's just with an easy push off the wall and a tumble turn. I got down to 106, and then I can blast out a 50 free pretty well now. I've gotten below 30 seconds, which is good for me. But then just the if I go and do a swim that has a bunch of sculling and drills now, and then add back the stuff that's at sort of a moderate pace, because when you're sculling, you don't carry a lot of speed and stuff like that. I still end up, pretty frequently under a buck 40 for the entirety of the swim, and pretty often in the 130s. And I'm starting to put together continuous pieces in the 120s too, which is cool. Yeah,
it's a huge improvement. So what mistakes were you making early on? Once you could swim continuously, what did you see in the clinic when we did the filming?
It's funny because I think I'd improved from your videos a fair bit by the time I saw you, and so the things that you changed at the time, I was like, these are very minor changes, but they were really big in the pool for my comfort. So the biggest problem I had is this is a rebuilt shoulder here because it was a chronic dislocator. And this one should be rebuilt, but it's held together with metal and all sorts of other stuff. And I was on my return because I was under rotating and under reaching. I was not giving myself enough room when I would come out on my return. And so I was just essentially impinging for the first part of the return, my recovery. So getting up on my side and letting the elbow open it up rather than trying to pull everything up and into my shoulder and decreasing the amount of space, that made a huge difference to the sort of sustainability of it. So it immediately, like my best laps, which at that point were, I had actually slowed down when I saw you because I had done some really fast swims, but it destroyed my shoulders. So then I had to rebuild my stroke. And my best laps then were like, I started to just knock them down. Like I was continuously in the 150s, then 145, then 140. And then and that made those same laps sustainable lap after lap after lap. Instead of just doing 100, having to rest 30 seconds, you can do the 500 at that speed before your shoulders tire out. And then adding a lot of the out of the pool stuff, that we talk about, and some of which you told me about and some of which, I found on my own has also made a massive difference. And as soon as I stopped doing that stuff, both in the pool, the technique stuff that you showed me, and the stuff outside of the pool, you regress. So it was 100% worth it because it all worked out correctly.
And what's that look like out of the pool for you? What are you doing on a regular basis?
Yeah, so the thing that made a big difference right away was doing static hangs. And so it doesn't sound like much. And I thought, how can it make that much of a difference? But just a pull-up bar, and initially not even using my body weight. And it's amazing how little I could tolerate at first. I had to work up to using my full body weight for the static hang, by doing like 5 times 15 seconds with support underneath. And now I'll do like 5 times 3 minutes of my body weight just hanging. And
Wow, that's
yeah,
huge.
yeah. And that opens up the shoulder space. And there's a bit of research that, shows that your supraspinatus tendon pulls on that corticoclavicular ligament. And so what that is, that's sort of the boundary of the space you have for your rotator cuff to move around underneath there. And it opens that up, maybe the same way that braces change the way your teeth are. It changes the structure. And so that gave me a little bit of space. And then cuff exercises, particularly external rotation on this side, because swimming is a very anterior front activity. You're pulling down with your lats and your pecs, and you're down there. And if you don't work the stuff on the backside, your scapula doesn't stick and glide to your back, and you get your internal rotation ends up fairly strong from the swimming, and people still like to do that too, but then they forget to do appropriate and dynamic external rotation in the same position that you would do your swimming stroke. And if I do those things, the shoulder pain just goes away.
Static hangs is an interesting one. I've started doing those for the last couple of months, and I can do probably a minute. I could do about a minute 30, just holding on, and it's like it's really the grip strength that gives out the quickest. But I built up to that, and I can do like two by 1 minute, in a row with about 30 seconds rest. So 5 by 3 minutes is massive.
Are you just doing it with one arm?
No,
doing it with
arms.
Both. Oh, okay.
Both arms. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I have almost unlimited ability to just hang there now, but it took a while to work up to it. It took a few months and months. But yeah, it's when I first went to do it, I couldn't hold my own body weight, like, at all. And I wasn't a big, strong guy, but I was not, totally deconditioned, but it was just too painful,
And are you letting you haven't letting the shoulders come up, just hanging like completely there? Or are you keeping a little bit of, you're sort of keeping it switched on a little bit, or just letting it hang completely?
No, I sink into it as much as I can, and let the soft tissues, and not the muscles, stretch out as much as I can.
Are there any mistakes that you made along the way where you look back and go, okay, I can see where I maybe went wrong here, or focused on something I didn't need to focus on, or yeah, anything that you look back at and go, like in hindsight, this was the wrong thing to do, or something I could have done better?
You said to me when I met with you, I was asking about breathing. I was definitely overthinking the breathing, and you're like, first of all, make sure you're getting enough air because otherwise you can't swim. And I was like, oh, that's true. Um, but then I went back and I was thinking about it, and I'm like, actually, I'm a doctor and thinking about respiratory physiology. Actually, what you're doing is making sure you're getting rid of enough air, because what you're really doing is, your reserve of oxygen is pretty much always going to be okay. It's very hard for people to drop their blood oxygen level, but you're blowing off the CO2. And so the way I make sure I get enough air is by blowing enough off before I take the breath. And that's the big thing, was that if I felt like I wasn't, you feel like you're not getting enough air, but you can't get enough air if you're not emptying enough out to take it back in. So what I do is try to maintain that buoyancy and maybe just let a little out of the nose. And when it's time for it to go, I'm still breathing from the top of my lung capacity. I'm not breathing from halfway down. I haven't let half of it out. When it's time to let it out before I breathe, it's, and then back in. And that way I don't oscillate in the water. I maintain the same buoyancy and momentum.
That's a good one. That's interesting, because people often are thinking, well, I need to breathe every 3 or every 4, because that way, like, maybe they feel better when they're swimming and they can maintain a better stroke. And like, bilateral breathing's certainly a good skill to have, but they're doing it to the detriment of, like, they just can't get enough air in, especially if they're going hard. They might need to breathe every 2. But the point you made there is a really good one, that you've got to make sure that you are exhaling enough. Otherwise, it's just like, you're just kind of topping up, and then you just never really get that, that sort of clear, that full lung full of air that's fresh air. So yeah, I haven't sort of thought too much about it, but what we want to try and do is make sure we have that little bit of exhalation from the start, and then just as you're turning your head to breathe, have that bigger exhalation where you don't completely clear the lungs, but you get rid of most of it at that point. So that's the way to do it. And I think it's easy to overthink all these different parts of the stroke, but if you can have that very gradual exhalation with a bigger exhale just before you get your next breath, that's the way to go about it. Now, one of the things you mentioned at the clinic, because you've come from a writing background, and I think you've done a little bit of sort of teaching and coaching with it, and with your background as a doctor, you mentioned something about what happens when you're learning a new skill. I'd love for you to share that with those that are listening, because I've actually said this at quite a few clinics, because I found it really interesting and a great way to describe what people go through as they're changing their technique.
Yeah, so it kind of transcends each sport. It's pretty, anything that requires significant technique and neuromuscular coordination, which is, a lot of different sports that you're doing repetitively. So, gait retraining for running, changing the geometry on your bicycle, and especially with swimming, because swimming is so much different. You can't hide mistakes in swimming like you can with the other two. Initially, the most efficient you will be is whatever you've been doing for a long time, even if it's wrong. So if I go, like when I started running, I ran cross country in high school, but mostly to stay in shape for riding bikes. And you never know anything about running. You run the way you run as a kid. And then I did some work on technique. And absolutely, when I first started doing it, I felt less efficient and weird and wrong. And the hard part is putting your faith in the person in front of you and trusting the process that you'll arrive at a better place. And the reason that's hard is because you feel strange and less efficient, and you are. So if you were to, take a swimmer or a runner and, measure their oxygen uptake and then have them change their technique fundamentally, initially their efficiency will drop and they'll require more oxygen to do what they've been doing. And that's because you're using all sorts of accessory muscles just to make that little tweak, because it's not like set it and forget it and in your muscle memory. So with running, when you start to shorten up your stride, increase your cadence, and make sure that the contact point is underneath your center of mass, initially that requires a lot of concentration, brain power. You're moving your pelvis all over the place. You're trying to keep your core straight so that the contact point is just underneath there. And then you're pulling too hard with your hip flexors and your efficiency initially drops. But if you keep in mind that the goal is to dispense with all the extra motion ultimately and just stick with that one technique and do it slowly over time, you do retrain. And then when that becomes your new way of doing it, if the technique is better, you will be more efficient. And with swimming, you're always in the marginal gains part, compared to the other two. So when I ride, I've been riding time trials on a bicycle since I was a kid, and you get really comfortable, feeling the wind and knowing if you're really comfortable doing it, you can feel like, being down like this and tweak things and feel where the wind is sticking to you and going over you. But you have to be going really fast to feel it. And in running, running doesn't have a lot of that because you're going slower the whole time. But when you get going fast enough, aerodynamics do come into it. Then you get into the water, and the water is, it's viscous and dense. So you're always in the marginal gains point, in swimming. So there's almost no instance in which you'll make a bigger gain by applying more power if your technique's not there, because you're always in the drag limited portion of the sport from the second you get in the water. So, you can ride your bike, you can ride at 5K an hour, you can ride at 10K an hour, you can ride 15K an hour, and you don't have to think too much about what you're doing with the wind. You can just ride for fitness. And if you're riding uphill, you'll get some resistance and you'll get fitter. And then when you start going out, with a group ride and you hit the front with a bunch of people, your position has to be good, and you have to know, where your actuation is and everything like that. And you have to be low and fast. And that's the marginal gains part where the aerodynamics matter at 45 kilometers an hour. With swimming, whether you're swimming at 2:30, 2 minutes, 1:30, 1:15, or you're Michael Phelps, you're in the drag limited part of it the whole time. And that's the big difference with swimming. So that's why, you can do whatever you want with swimming. But if the technique is bad, you will never realize the gains in strength you have. You'll just work harder and make minimal changes in speed.
That is a great point, and something that I've tried to instill in the athletes that I'm coaching, especially recently, is just that body awareness, feeling where your hips are, where are your legs, where's your head when you're turning to breathe, just building that body awareness and always keeping in mind that we want to first and foremost have good body position, because your fitness and strength does not really matter too much if you're swimming like this. So,
and I will say that there's one thing, I'm going to say it. It's from another YouTube channel, but where the guy said,
"Stop all out."
Yeah, where the guy said, "Stop thinking with words and think with your body." And that I thought was good advice, because when you're in there, you're like, "Oh, I'm not rotating my head far enough. I'm not rotating my head far enough." But if you just visualize what you want to do and stop thinking verbally, then you have to feel it instead of think it with words. And that connects your neuromuscular system much better than thinking with words. You can think words all day long, but in the end, you're trying to get into that flow state where you don't have words, and you're sort of doing it automatically. And that's the goal. So start by just feeling, where you are in the water and can you feel the differences?
Were there any particular drills that you did over your time that you found were helpful for changing some of those things?
Oh yeah, tons. You had a podcast with Joe Friel on, right? And he's like a hero. Um, and he said, I think he was saying like, you could just do drills for your first year or something like that, and you might improve the same amount. And I don't know if I would only do drills and not swim, but I do tons and tons and tons of them. Lots of long dog. When I was starting out, lots of long dog and, the stuff on the side and YMCA, tons and tons and tons of it for after I met you, just to get the position in and also to make sure my entry was wide enough and that I wasn't crossing over and really tried to get that down. And now I still do some of that, but sculling is huge. I find sculling really helps. And I think if this morning I was swimming with a friend and I was like, you can change the way your freestyle feels in 200 meters. And you do the fist drill going up for 50 meters, skull coming back, do the AOK drill going down, and then swim your freestyle. So do 200 freestyle now and then 200 freestyle that way. And it feels totally different. You feel the entire catch. You feel the mass of the water. You get a hold of it. You know where you want your hand, how far to keep the fingers apart, and you shove that water behind you. And, you drop, 6 seconds off your previous lap.
Any advice that you'd give to someone who was, maybe 3 to 6 months into their swimming and maybe around that 2 minutes to 2:30 mark where you were, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, a couple of things, and that it's not like technical stuff. It's just the approach is. I think a lot of people, if you're worried about your pace at all, it means you've got a little bit of that sort of type A in you. Because some people are swimming, you ask, what pace do you do? I don't know, I just swim. Fantastic. I mean, and good for them. They're enjoying it. But if you're worried about your pace at all, it means that you're probably someone who's invested a bit in their own performance. And that's the kind of person that often runs the risk of not being kind to themselves and patient with themselves. And I've probably been that person to my own self a lot in my life. And it's not helpful with swimming because when you get frustrated, you move out of the flow state and into your own head, and then your performance will decline. And remember that you're doing it because it's an enjoyable thing to, we come from water. To connect with the water is actually really an enjoyable thing. And your speed is a byproduct of the time you spend in the water acquiring that feeling and strength. And so, my best swims, to be honest, where I start to swim, and I don't use the watch or the form goggles for the first part of it. I just let myself connect to the water and relax so that I'm not like goal oriented from the second I'm in there, and just feel what I'm doing, and then just relax and be kind to yourself. And then it's much easier to not overdo the things that make you less efficient, and you end up faster that way. And all of it takes time.